I want you guys to imagine a world where nutrition wasn't confusing as shit, because in the online space, it can be extremely overwhelming and you can consume so much stuff that you almost overthink everything that you don't actually do anything. So it's a bit of an analysis by paralysis kind of thing. So one thing that you kind of want to focus on is reframing your mindset around food and how you see food, more so not to see it in a way that you have to earn it, but more so as understanding that it's fuel and it's going to help you achieve your goals, whether it's performance related or just day to day, right? So a lot of you would train extremely hard. I would say probably all of you. But really one thing that becomes an issue is not understanding how to fuel for all that work, especially outside of your training. So motivation typically isn't the issue there. It's just more so having that alignment and understanding what to prioritize and when to prioritize it based on your goals and where you're actually at. So over the next 30, 40-ish minutes, I'll try to be quick and hopefully it doesn't take that long, but I want to show you how to actually prioritize nutrition for performance. So these are strategies that I use with my athletes, ones that have helped me personally, to actually help improve your performance. So the way that I'm going to do this is focus on a 3-pillar structure. The first one's going to be around energy availability. Then you're going to have fuel distribution and fuel timing and amplification. So everything that I touch on will land in one of 3 of these pillars. I also just want to highlight to some of you, as I run through things, you'll probably sit here and just go I already knew that. That's okay, because I'm probably here to more so remind you of these things rather than teach you. Because even if you sit through this whole thing and you come out of it with 1 or 2 new things that you can take away, I'll be extremely happy and it's going to actually benefit you long term. So a bit about myself. I like to run. I like to lift weights. I predominantly work with endurance style, what you would call hybrid athletes, whatever that means. But essentially, I have an Italian background. I love food. I've always loved food. I've always been interested in how it can fuel you day to day. And I see fueling for performance not so much just what you do in training, but day to day. So some of you will be mothers, husbands, fathers, partners, business owners, employees, whatever it is. It's understanding how to fuel for that stuff and actually getting the most out of yourself day to day so you can be better in those situations for the ones that you care about as well. So as I run through this, I want it to be interactive because quite frankly, I can't really read your minds and I want you guys to get the most out of it. So I don't actually want to stand here and lecture you, but I'll give you a framework as I'm going through to kind of help you structure your questions and ask me as we go along. You can challenge me, you can even argue with me, Matthew. But the way that I'll probably focus on doing this is with those 3 pillars, and the easiest way that I can actually explain all this stuff to you is, and excuse my drawing here if it's no good, but I'm going to utilize this, which does not look like a pyramid, but is essentially a pyramid, to kind of help you understand each layer. And each layer is going to represent something different and how you can highlight it and not so much use it as information, but more so like a filter to understand where you're at and what you should focus on and what you shouldn't really focus on. So each layer is going to have its own priority, and we'll start from the bottom up because essentially without the bottom you don't really have the foundation. So our bottom layer, and the one that is the most important, and I'm left-handed so sorry, we're going to touch on calories. So rather than this just be extremely boring and you not understand why that's at the bottom of it, a common mistake is that people will, like I said earlier, they'll view food as something that they need to earn or burn off and see it more so not so much as a tool, but more of like a hindrance. And when we talk about fueling for performance, especially in a nature like this, you want to make sure that you're eating enough food. So under eating, and again, it comes down to depending on what your goals are. A lot of people might focus on fat loss, muscle gain, and just performance outputs, and depends what you're training for, if it's for an event or something like that. So where this actually hurts you is not eating enough, which then leads to having flatter sessions, your performance plateaus, and you don't actually get the most out of yourself, and you increase your risk of energy. So that's called low energy availability, when you don't actually have enough coming in to support the work. So I want you to think about it as if it's your phone. We all use our phone excessively throughout the day. I would say most of us would probably finish the day on maybe 20, 30% charge. So throughout the day, think about how much you use this. You can frequently continue to charge it, but if you don't charge it enough, you're going to end the day at a deficit. So relaying that back to your body, the more you expend, the more you need to top up. So for people in here that have a laborious job, or they're tradies, or whatever it is, your output is so much higher, and I don't want you to think of training as being the number one thing that's going to dictate how much energy you require and burn. It's more so understanding your lifestyle, what you can stick to and what you can't achieve. So making sure that this foundation is locked in, set, loaded, and good to go, but it has to be goal dependent, because if you are focusing on fat loss, for example, there are things that you have to, there's a bit of give and take. So fat loss, you're naturally going to be in a calorie deficit, which means you're going to have less energy available to expend during sessions. So you have to know that you're going to sacrifice your performance a little bit in the fact that you want to lose weight. So on the flip side of it, when you focus more so on performance and hitting new numbers and training for an event or whatever it is, that's when this needs to be like locked in and your main priority. Because like I said, if you don't have enough energy coming in, you just can't expend it. So what happens with this is you really just need to understand that it just matches your output, whatever it is. You just want this to kind of match your output, and understand that this builds the layers up from there. So in terms of the foundational layer of calories, was there anything that you guys had questions on, or anything that you wanted to ask or weren't clear on? Nah, cool, all good, easy. So moving up the pyramid, the next layer we have is macros. So this is your macronutrients. So this is your proteins, your carbohydrates, your fats, and I also like to factor in fiber as like a fifth macronutrient there. So a common mistake that I see in terms of this that people have is more so relying so heavily on protein, because there is just a massive amount of push on protein, especially in the supermarkets. You'll see things that are high protein this, high protein that, and they're actually not that high protein. But where this actually hurts you in terms of performing, especially for your sessions and day to day, protein is extremely satiating. So that means that it keeps you fuller for longer. Your body actually requires more energy to burn it during digestion. So if you are too full from eating too much protein, your foundational layer is pretty much redundant, because you're not going to be able to eat the amount of calories that you need to sustain your performance day to day. So that's why it's important to have this layer locked in and understand what actually drives the next layer. In terms of the other macronutrients, and I've touched on this previously, but in relation to carbohydrates versus fats, when you are working at a moderate to higher intensity, carbohydrates is your primary fuel source. So, and I've used this a couple times, but you can think of our bodies like a Toyota Prius, for example. They have two motors, one's electric, one's petrol. At the electric, when the electric one is being used, is more so just like at that easy intensity. Probably think about city style driving. kind of just ticks along, right? And you can think about that motor as like fat being the representation there. So fat is what we would use in our body to drive that. Once the intensity ramps up to moderate and to a higher intensity, that's when carbohydrates becomes a primary fuel source. So this, and when I say moderate intensity, it's like a slightly elevated heart rate. So when we think about like an easy intensity, even in relation to running, when people say I'm going for an easy run, most people can't run easy because their heart rate is already at like 165, 170, Ella. So it's understanding, you could probably see these macros as like levers in terms of what your goals are. So when we talk about performance and making sure that we are fueling correctly, carbohydrates is your main lever to drive that energy. Protein's there to repair and rebuild, and fats are there for hormone protection and body like regulation as well. So it's understanding the role of each one of these. And yeah, like I said, it can often, like I said, it just, this doesn't matter without this. So, but it is vastly, the way you utilize these is goal dependent. So these make up your calories. Was there any questions in terms of the macro side of things?
How important is like I always say bigger than that most of the time. How important is like a dirty bulk versus like a clean bulk?
Well, as in just eating whatever you want versus actually being strategic with it?
Yeah.
So, well again, a dirty bulk, it's that, right? So when you want to put on muscle, you need to be in a calorie surplus. So it doesn't matter what you eat. If it's 500 to 1,000 grams or like calories more on your baseline energy, you're going to put on weight. But in terms of the macro side of it, if you want it to be like a lean muscle, you would prioritize protein, but you don't need to overdo it. So someone like Matt, I'm going to use you as an example, has an extremely high protein diet, like to the point where it's like laughable. Like it's extremely high protein diet, but he puts away food and like his energy output is extremely high. So a lot of people might look at it and go, I need to have protein in every meal and blah, 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 and all my snacks need to have it, which is this guy. He just sees protein and his lights go off. He goes, hectic, I want it. But in terms of making sure if you want to go for like a lean gain, you only really need to prioritize by having a protein to the 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. So for someone that's like 80 kilos, you can just have 160 grams of protein a day. He gets that in 2 meals. So it's understanding that side of things, because it's not to say that, like at the end of the day, protein does have energy, right? So it has calories, right? But it's how your body utilizes it from there on to then what your goal is to be. Does that make sense? Cool. Yes. Yeah.
At what point do you find most athletes go into like shock from like having enough calories? So because someone like Matt who has high protein, thinking of their targets a day, but not hitting calories, not hitting their calories. At what point do you like realise that their body's just storing that unused protein or whatever for energy, or was it resources, not knowing where the next source is coming from?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few things with that, because in terms of the shock thing and the understanding, it's more of a mindset reframe. So even if you have people that had like a fat loss goal, for example, they would primarily be protein dominant. They would focus on hitting that number that they need to hit every single day. It'll be slightly higher, only because it helps keep you fuller for longer, like I said, and it helps you burn more energy in digestion. So, but typically, because they're in that calorie deficit, their carbohydrates and their fats are quite low. So the mindset reframe from there is that people will come from a fat loss background, be on like 1,800 calories, say, and I might say, okay, well now you need to eat 2,600. They're like, what the heck? Like, how am I going to eat this? But it's not, your protein's your anchor, so you want that to be your constant, and then increasing your carbohydrates and fats from there. So like a really easy way to fix the distribution here is probably I'll probably just write it down, it might be easier. So protein would be 1.8 to 2.2 G per kg of body weight. And then if you go fats, you want this to be anywhere between like 0.7 to, let's say, 1 gram per kilo body weight. And then the rest of that, the rest of your calorie distribution would just go to carbs. So when there are people like Matt that focus so heavily on this and is having probably like 3 to 4 grams per kilo body weight, and that's not an exaggeration, it leads to underfueling. So like I said earlier, it all ties back into this foundation, the base of that pyramid. So it's understanding that you need to eat enough, and the biggest shift that you would make is increasing the carbohydrates. Wherever Jace is going. Make sense? No, you're an idiot. Well, it's all good. Cool. Was there anything else on that side of things?
Do you think that's where performance is going to suffer most? You're not getting carbs in. You're still hitting your protein goals.
Yeah.
Fats remaining around the same.
Yeah.
You're not hitting those carbs.
Yeah.
So that's why someone like that might suffer. I hit my carbs.
Yeah, so touching on that, that's again, this is the number that you would manipulate the most, is your carbohydrate intake. And again, it's dependent on the goal. So for you training for that backyard ultra, this would remain constant. That I would keep at probably 0.8 per kilo of body weight. And then the rest, you would just load your carbohydrates. And you can even think like, because you're going to be expending more energy, your output's going to be quite high, those runs are going to be longer. You want that to be around at least 5 grams per kilo of body weight. So, but you want this, that is what's going to drive it. So you want your snacks to be predominantly carbohydrate. Because it's very easy to get this protein number in 3 meals across the day. So if you think breakfast, lunch and dinner, you can easily get it in, but it's the rest that suffers. And when it comes to performance, again, bringing it back down to the base and the foundation, that's where you want to have the most energy and focus on the calories. Yes, Jason?
If mainly you get fats from your meats, you won't add fats to your goal. You just get that mainly from your meat, like avocado, rather than seeing add fats to your diet.
Well, again, it depends what your diet is based around. So if you're eating a lot of meat, there is lean meat, there is fatty meats. So that number is actually quite hard to hit. If you think about it, and if you eat a whole foods based diet, a lot of people focus primarily on getting whole foods in, and they think it's like the bee's knees, which I think is important to have as like the base of your diet. But when you're expending so much energy, that's where ultra processed foods need to come in, and that will tie into like the next layer. But Jace, if you're eating like a diet that has predominantly red meat, you'll hit that pretty easily, as well as like chicken thigh, salmon. Salmon's a really fatty fish. You'll get a lot of fat from there. And then you would get it through your additives. So a lot of people don't understand, but they'll get it through their cooking oils. So like olive oil, sauces, and all that kind of stuff. And if you're getting pre-made meals, ready-made meals, you hit that no problem. So that's probably that focus side of things. Make sense? Yeah, but it's about understanding, like, it's dependent on your goal, right? And understanding what you want to focus on. Because people have different goals. So it's so easy to come here and just go, you need to eat 2,000 calories, you need to eat 3,000, you need to eat 4,000. But it's like, how do you distribute those macronutrients? And how are you getting it? Cool. Anything else on that? Nope. Easy. All right. So the third part is timing. So when I talk about timing, this is, again, doesn't mean anything if that and that isn't aligned, right? So one thing I want you guys to remember is like, you don't really earn the right to go up to the next layer of the pyramid unless the one below it's nailed, right? So once you have your calories, they're bang on, you understand what you're doing, you're consistent with that, you understand your macronutrient distribution. Now timing is where it comes into play in terms of performance and like when to eat certain foods, what foods to avoid, what ones are actually going to drive your session. So this is more dependent on your energy availability during your session, before, and how you're going to recover after. So one thing that people often will struggle with is not eating before they train. How many of you guys actually eat something before you train? Like, put your hand up. That's pretty good. You don't count. Salmon and eggs doesn't count. So that's good to see that there are people that actually eat, because a lot of people feel like they need to fast. But it's understanding what types of food that you want to eat that's actually going to drive that performance. So before your sessions and when it would be required is essentially if you train first thing in the morning, your liver glycogen is extremely low. So you have your muscle glycogen and your liver glycogen, and both pathways help transport carbohydrates to your muscles and help you get through your session, right? So if you train in the morning and you feel like you just can't eat anything prior and you really struggle with that, these are where simple options like you can have fruit juice, like nudie juice on hand, that's 100% carbohydrates essentially. You can have dried fruit, you can have crumpets, bagels with honey, rice cakes, bananas. There's a plethora of options, but it's just understanding how close you can eat it to your session, what's actually going to help digest really quickly. So the things that digest quickly are those simple carbohydrates, and that's going to be like your dried fruits and like all those options that I put before. And when you train in the Arvo, like majority of you guys, because you just finished a session, you've probably eaten lunch, maybe 12:30, 1 o'clock, and then you train at 4:30, and a lot of you probably haven't eaten between that session. So you've got 3 hours of no fueling, and this is where a top-up is essentially required to help get you through. So the top-up you'll want to have around 30 minutes before, and this can be something that's 30 grams of carbs. Like, if you're rushing down here, you can stop in at a servo, get yourself a Gatorade or a Powerade, and that will actually help push you through. So that's in relation to the pre-training fuel side of things. Again, when you go into the intra-training, so during your sessions, these are for those longer sessions that are probably going over an hour, or when you guys have comp days or anything like that, that's where you'll want to focus on actually topping up during your session. So our body has roughly around 90 minutes of stored energy. So once we are getting closer and closer to that 90-minute threshold, you end up actually pretty much starting at zero. So the thing is, you want to fuel early and often. So when I say that, that's probably better in relation to like running, if any of you guys do running or long distance running. Anything that's over an hour, you probably want to start fueling. Anything closer to an hour and a half, you want to start fueling quite early. And again, these things can look like lollies, sports drinks, so Gatorades, Powerades, dried fruit, anything that you can actually get down, and it's going to help digest quickly. So one thing that people struggle with, especially circling back to the pre-training side of things, is having foods that are too high in fat, too high in fibre, too high in protein. So all three of those things slow down digestion, and then that's what's going to make it sit here. So if you've had like, you were starving, you've finished working, like, I need a cheeseburger, I'm going to Macca's. You get a cheeseburger, that thing's just going to sit here. So rather than that, you just get a full strength Coke. So that's like a simple twist, because a full strength Coke is going to get you like 40 grams of carbs. So that's in terms of timing and fueling your sessions. And then again, the next layer in relation to that is like your post-training nutrition. So again, a lot of people just neglect this and probably wait a little bit too long to eat after their session, which then hurts recovery and stops you from getting to the next one. So everything that we're doing in terms of timing strategies is to help us get the most out of our session, increase that intensity, not have like the energy slumps, and then push to get to the next one. So when you talk about post-training, you want to make sure that you're getting like a quick source of carbohydrates within 30 to 60 minutes, and that can be like a chocolate milk, a smoothie that's probably more carbohydrate dominant, and then having a decent meal after that that has micronutrients. So then bringing in the whole food side of things, getting lots of colour on your plate, focusing on protein and focusing on carbs. So that's the timing side of things. Was there any questions in relation to that? Yep.
If you were planning on doing like a longer endurance session, that was going to be like 1.5, 2 hours, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but it was going to be like low intensity, at what point would you start having food?
I would, so even at that lower intensity, so like it relates back to that 90 minutes of having the stored energy. So the lower intensity, yes, you would use fat, so fat oxidation to help you burn that energy. But as you get closer and closer to that 90 minutes, so if it's a 2-hour session, hour 45, as soon as it starts depleting, you want to start topping it up. So for those longer sessions, I would start probably like 30 minutes if you like into that session, if you're not used to fueling during, and then probably bringing it a bit closer to maybe that 20-minute mark. And at each of those intervals, probably having around 30 grams of carbs. And then, because...
Every like 20, 30 minutes after you had a snack again, you would have something else?
Yeah, after your pre-training. So your pre-training is typically between 30 to 90 minutes before. If it's like a morning, again, in the arvo, it might be a little bit less. But if you haven't had anything in the afternoon, so say if this is, we'll just use a morning run, for example, or a morning endurance session, for example, you'll probably eat something maybe an hour before, and then head out the door. 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes into that, you want to have your first hit of carbohydrates. And that's where you would focus on probably around hitting 25, 30 grams. And then as that session goes on, you want it to equate to having around 45 to 60 grams of carbs an hour. And then that will help you produce. So even if it is a lower intensity, we still want to practice getting that on and like training our gut. Because when it does come to that higher intensity, you do have a bit of a base there for your gut to kind of digest that. Yeah, even if you don't feel like you need it. So when you feel like you need it, it's too late. Yeah. So waiting for that point to go, I am crashing here, I need something, it's too late. So it comes back to fueling early and often.
What about on comps where there's like 4 or 5 events in a day? When we use kind of fuel before an event, it's like going out 5% wrong at each event. When we fuel before that event.
So like as in before each individual event or each one? Well, it's a bit more complicated. So this is where like nuance is probably a bit more important. So how long does the comp days go for? Like is it over like the whole day? Like 8 hours, 7 hours? And you just do events sporadically? So you would have, how early is your first, like 6 a.m. is the first event. So 6 a.m. before that you want to have like your pre-training meal, which would be, I would recommend having something that's like 0.5 to 1 gram a kilo of body weight. So probably having, for myself, I'm about 80 kilos. I would aim to have something that's like 80 grams of carbs. So that's a bagel with a ton of honey. I would prioritise having that an hour to 90 minutes before. Then you'd hit that session, you'd probably relax throughout the day, and then you would eat as required. So you don't need to have a full meal, and if each, like how long is each?
We've got 2 hours for each event, an hour and a half for each event.
Between each event.
10 minutes of wasted, half an hour.
But they're extreme high intensity though. Yeah. So right before it, this is where like the ultra processed foods come in. So you'd pack a ton of lollies, right? You'd have lollies, you'd have gels, you'd have sports drink, and then you would just, before each one, probably half an hour before each one, just top that up. Because if it's only going for like a 10-minute spurt, you're obviously not going to need anything during, but you want to progressively keep it topped up throughout the day.
You can also carb load like the day before, 2 days before.
You can.
Carbohydrates.
You can. You can carb load, yeah.
So quickly, how much protein day at the comp?
Not really. You can keep it extremely moderate. So if you want to have something, so like the whole day you don't feel like you're just eating lollies and sugar, you could have a wrap that has like some chicken on it, like chicken and salad, but don't like overdo it. You don't want a monster burrito that has like beans and rice and shit like that. So you can have like a normal lunch, and then that way that should kind of give you a bit more of a slow release in terms of the energy. And then just before each event, have some simple carbohydrates. Cool. Anything else on timing? All good? All right, the one I care about the least, but a lot of you probably focus on too much, is supplements. I actually don't have much to say about supplements because to me, I don't think that they're necessary. They're called supplements for a reason. And if you have that sorted, you don't need that. So that's why they're at the top of the pyramid. There are some that are beneficial, and you probably see it on social media about creatine and its benefits, and in terms of cognitive function and mental health, as well as performance and ATP production. There are other ones that people can be deficient in, like vitamin D, calcium, but these are all ones that people don't think are important. So the ones that actually can help, so even fish oils in terms of omega-3s, our body doesn't naturally produce that. So the things that we don't get naturally, or it's actually hard to get through like foods in general, because some of it is hard to get, that's where these will come into it. But a lot of people would use supplements and they'll have like a crazy stack, and people tell me, oh, I'm taking this, this and this. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. So again, it's more so understanding where this is going to help you. So if you genuinely struggle to get in enough protein, or you're time poor, or you don't like cooking, you can have like a whey protein powder. That's probably a good use of it to help you hit this number here. But if you already hit this through 3 meals a day, and then you come to this straight away, and then for dinner you get a FroPro frozen pizza or whatever those things are, like you're just overdoing it. So some that I pretty much only recommend, and it's because I work with predominantly like endurance athletes, so you're more susceptible to bone stress fractures and stuff like that. So that's where vitamin D is important, because that actually helps absorb calcium, which helps strengthen your bones, and that's harder to get through food. And especially people that work in an office and they don't work outside, you're not getting enough through the sun anyway. So that's supplements. Like I said, I'm not a massive fan. When people ask, like, what supplements do you suggest? I just say I don't. So was there anything that you guys wanted to touch on about supplements, or had curiosities about, or questions on that side of things?
You don't use creatine, do you recommend it?
I recommend it. I'm extremely shit at taking it. Like, I've had the gummies before, and I just don't want to eat gummies to get creatine in, and I have the powder next to my coffee machine, and I just look at it, I don't even take it. So that's the other issue with creatine, is just like, to get the benefits, you need to take it every day. And that's why you see people come out with the gummies and the sachets and all that. I think the sachets are a great idea. And then people complain about how expensive it is, but you're paying for the convenience. You're not paying for just the product. So
Is it possible to get 5 grams of creatine in food?
it is, but you've got to eat a kilo of meat. So a kilo of red meat will give you 5 grams of creatine. So 5 grams is like the suggested serving per day. So to get that 5 grams, you need to eat a kilo of red meat, which is going to exceed this number, and you're going to vastly exceed this number, and you're not going to eat pretty much anything other than red meat. So you'll see like carnivore people and keto and ancestral eating, whatever the fuck that means, focus on eating red meat and going, I get creatine through this. Like, sick, pal, you don't get enough micronutrients or anything else. So you can get it through food. It's not recommended.
Can you get it through like chicken and fish or?
Very little amounts. So you can get it through other sources, but it's like, again, you have to eat a ton of it.
Do you know what it's doing? Creatine, is it just helping you?
It helps energy production. So it helps you it helps your output. So it helps you actually like get stronger, because you store more fluid in your muscles. And that's going to help you absorb your glucose and get the ATP production, and actually help you like push a little bit harder essentially. And now there's like way more studies about it in terms of like its cognitive benefits and like helping depression and stuff like that. So it's really like it is a good supplement to take. It's just a lot of people just don't take it daily. Like you would just take it sporadically. I got a kilo of it and I've taken like maybe like 3 times in the last 6 months. But that's me. Like I'm not good with it. You had your hand up. Okay. So electrolytes, don't buy them. Don't buy them because you get the main electrolyte that we really need is sodium, and you get enough through food. So when you see electrolyte companies come out and they're like, this is no carb, full stack of electrolytes, inject some sugar. It's not, inject some salt, sorry. It's not required. So if you do buy them, there is again nuance to it. So it's understanding why you would use it. So say you're doing an ultra endurance event, it's like 100 miler, 100K, something where you are sweating so much that you need to replenish fluids and you actually understand how much fluid you lose per hour. That's where electrolyte drinks are good because you're going to replenish that. So for someone like me, my sweat rate's probably like 1.7 litres per hour. To get that through just water alone is a ton of water to drink while I'm running. So I'll have sodium tablets to help that hydration, but you can be too hydrated, if that makes sense, which can do more damage than good. So with the electrolyte side of things, again, it comes down to usage and when you're going to use it. But if you wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm going to have my insert brand here that I'm not going to say in the morning because I need to hydrate, don't do that. Because again, if you eat enough of this, you're going to get enough through your food. Especially if you don't eat like a full-on whole foods diet and you're eating like some processed food, you're going to just get in enough sodium anyway. Cool. Any other questions on that?
I know you consider weight when you're calculating all this, but what about gender and age? Is there any differences?
Yes. Sorry, guys. It depends. It depends. So yeah, gender does play a role. So a lot of females fall into the category of under fueling, and I think it's a bit of like diet culture is to blame for this, and women end up losing their periods because they're not eating enough and they have a bit of like their their hormone regulation isn't there, right? So that's where the base of this is so important, is for women to actually eat enough day to day, especially if, like obviously when women are pregnant, they need to just eat and eat and eat. Postpartum is when a lot of women will kind of go, I need to lose weight, so I'm going to drastically slash my calories. But what that does, again, it messes with your hormones, it messes with the milk production, and then you're not going to be able to breastfeed as well as actually like survive. So females will naturally need a little bit more, and focusing on making sure they're eating enough day to day purely for like hormone regulation. I think men can get away with going a lot more aggressive, but when women want to lose weight and they go aggressive, there's so much more that you need to factor in. Cool. Was there any other questions about anything else?
Do you ever recommend a calculator for calculating how many calories we should get?
Yeah, I have one.
Great question.
I think that was a tee up. I have one, but I'll put it on the Facebook page and you guys can all use it. I use it to collect emails, but I won't get yours. It's all good. Yeah, I'll put my Instagram and email on the board, and you guys can ask me questions and all that kind of stuff. I'll put the calorie calculator in the group, but again, it's once you do understand how much you should be eating, and again, the calorie calculator I've built factors in hybrid athletes, so like running and strength. So I'll ask you like how much cardio do you do, how much strength training do you do, and then build it from there.
This kind of goes against
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So like I'm not a big like calorie counter, but I don't believe in like tracking so much. I think it's a good tool to understand like how much you should be using, like eating for about 2 weeks. So if you're starting to work towards a performance goal, it's understanding, okay, I have this goal that I'm going to work towards in 20 weeks. For the first week, I'm going to track my food because I know I need to hit X amount of calories, and this will give you an idea on how to do it. So rather than like weighing out food, a way that you can do it just by looking at a plate, so like as a visual representation as a plate. For like what I would call a performance plate, you would want half of it to be like carbohydrates, and then a third to be like micro, so like colour, and then the other third to be protein. And then think of fat as just like a little tiny bit in the middle, right? And then in terms of like what we'll call an everyday plate, that's a terrible circle. You would want half of it to be, sorry, not half of it. Forget that one. It's a shit circle anyway. That one's not any better. But you would go a quarter protein, a quarter carbs, and yeah, I was right. And half non-starchy veg and fruit, and that's non-starchy veg and colour, and then your fat would just be like a little thumb. So every day, if you were just to like look at a plate, you're like, okay, a quarter of my plate's going to be chicken, a quarter of it's going to be rice, and the rest of it I'm just going to load with veggies. And then if you have a big training day, you're going to go half my plate, I want it to look like carbohydrates, a quarter of it I want it to be protein, a quarter of it I want it to be micronutrients and veggies.
How many meals would you have, like, meat?
Meat. Well, protein comes in like multiple sources. So in terms of, again, when you're trying to factor in what you want to eat day to day, it's got to be something that you enjoy and something that you stick to, right? So I have meat in lunch and dinner, and my breakfast is oats, yogurt, berries, honey. Like it's a massive oat bowl, and I get it through there. So again, if you want to eat meat 3 times a day and you want to have it for breakfast, that's sweet. If you want to have eggs instead, that's awesome. If you want to have a more micronutrient dense vegetarian kind of style approach, oats are great, Greek yogurt's great. There is no right or wrong way to approach it, because the first thing you want to make sure it's going to be something that you can stick to. So there's no point like overhauling what you're already doing and then making drastic changes, because you might stick to it for like a week or 2 weeks, and then you're just going to go, this is shit, I don't like eating like this. So it's more so understanding like what you can add rather than what you can remove. So like, what would you have for breakfast?
What do you have?
Yeah, okay. And then like lunch and dinner.
Yeah, probably would have meat and dinner.
Yeah.
But I might not necessarily have that lunch.
Yeah.
I do just want very much try
Well, you can get it through various sources. So like, what's your lunch look like?
maybe like salad, sometimes tuna,
Yeah.
rice.
Yeah. So like, even with the tuna, you're going to get protein through the tuna. And then like salad, you get your micronutrients, you get a bit of protein through the rice as well. So like, you do have your core ingredients that are like noted as protein sources, and that's your animal meats, your like tofus, your fishes, all that kind of stuff. And then other sources of foods actually add to that. So there are vegetables that are higher in protein than other vegetables, but they're not considered a protein source because they're predominantly carbohydrates and micronutrients. So it all adds up, and that's why it's so important to have that variety, especially when you do train like extremely hard and it's like we're not professional athletes. We don't need to have it be like 100% dialed. It's just understanding the basics and having that foundation and going, okay, well, I know that I need to eat a certain amount each day. I know what each one of my plates need to include. So proteins, carbs, fats, micronutrients, and then going from there, adjusting your volume, if that makes sense. Cool. Anything else?
Yeah. What's the benefit of the non-starchy veg? Like, as an example, I eat rice and steak every day for lunch.
Yeah.
Just rice and plates, but that's it.
So no colour.
No colour.
Yeah. So that's where you get, the colour is where you get your micronutrients and your fibre. So fibre is important to help. There's two types, there's insoluble and soluble. One's like digest with water, one pretty much clears you out and helps regulate like your gut bacteria. So you need that bacteria to feed itself and actually like work in line with everything else. So you want to have colour on all your plates.
So fiber's not a myth.
Fibre is not a myth. So add colour to your steak and rice. And it's easy. Yeah. It's yeah. Cool. Make sense? Easy. Anything else? Nope. Cool. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening.